Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the emotion sets the SkyBox created for baseball. That's a 95 set and a 96 set. SkyBox was created for basketball, and that was the domain that it was intended for, that it was built around. And in 1992, they decided to expand out into football, which was kind of a wild, wild west. It was their arms were open, they were letting everybody in, and lots of crazy stuff was happening, and it was a perfect place for SkyBox to expand into. With baseball, it would take them a while until they actually got in there. And really, they wouldn't even do that until they joined with Fleer. So Fleer was kind of their gateway in. But how would the SkyBox brand work in baseball? Baseball is all about tradition, and you really got to earn your stripes. So SkyBox never made a run like in football where they just dropped in and they said, yep, we're here, this is us. Instead, they needed to introduce themselves in a way that kind of caught people's attention. And the way they did that was they used their emotion set that they'd created for 94-95 in basketball. And this was exactly the right approach for them to take, because the emotion set is an extremely impressive set. It's a set that is a glorious exploration. It is a celebration in and of itself. The cards were magnificently crafted. Every time that you open up a pack and look at a card, it in and of itself is an amazing card. So if you're going to introduce yourself to somebody new, especially a very reserved group like baseball card fans, baseball card collectors who are used to tradition and the things that had always been done, you got to do it in a way where they really want to bring you into the fold, and emotion was the right move to make. The cards themselves, first off, the way they came was kind of like with Fleer. So with Fleer, you have a box, and inside you have a bunch of little boxes. You open that up and you have a cello pack with the player cards in it. So every pack is a box. Well, in this case, they made an even bigger box. The boxes that they made were very tall, so the height was actually an unusually large size. And these boxes, they had a seal on the back. It was really something that stood out, partially because of the size, partially because of the real estate that they had for their design. And so they had a really elegant card box that they made. And this was a perfect way to look like this is the big thing that everybody needs to be focusing on. Great marketing approach. So in baseball, every time that these boxes were sitting there waiting to be discovered, they really were waiting to be discovered. It was such that they could bring the audience in, so that was a great move. But the cards inside were fantastic. These are a little thinner than Fleer, so it wasn't an exact match, and the slightly thinner quality made them feel a little bit more special, even though the rest of the cards still had kind of a heritage to Fleer itself. So it was a good pairing, but the images on these cards, they're really tight personal shots of each player. Very well selected, and the background is basically fuzzed out, and then they have a team color for the whole back, not like a cutout. You can still see the fuzzy area of the background, so you feel like it's a tight shot of the player and then everything else is out of focus. And it reads beautifully, especially with the rich colors that they chose. Slight color fade, just right. And then they have gold text, they have some gold bracketing, which doesn't do anything. They have the emotion logo, which looks really neat. And then they also have some text, either on the bottom or on the side, perhaps at the top, some text that is in holofoil. And so it's almost kind of there in a way, and yet it can be read really well. It looks really special, and it is a word, or it's potentially, like in Ken Griffey Jr. here, it's also a nickname. So with Cal Ripken Jr., it's class. With Barry Bonds, it's confident. With Dennis Eckersley, it's focused. With Ricky Henderson, he's the professor. With Kirby Puckett, it's dependable. These are the terms that they used, that they put with the players. Sometimes it was very much associated with the players specifically, like with class with Cal Ripken Jr. Other times it may be something that is focused more on the way that the image reads. So the way that these cards worked was really interesting because it was all very personal. The shot was personal. The lack of focus in the background really pulled you in. The semi-gloss sheen was just enough that it worked in a balanced way where it wasn't overpowering. It didn't really remove you. It kept you kind of engaged. And then you have a personal word on there that just kind of elevates it even further. And every single player had a different word. A word may be repeated here or there, but by and large, this set was all about something distinctive about every single individual player. It was a brilliant card design, and because of that intimate quality. The card backs are very much Flair card backs. I mean, really almost to a fault. This just kind of the way they did it. These are not cards that you intended to get to learn about the player. This is the case where every time you get a card, this is a card you want to put on display. That's how impressive these were. So the card back was like an afterthought. And the cards stood so much on their own, they didn't even bother with subsets. They just said, yep, these are the cards, and they moved on to the inserts. So the inserts were the other element to this set. And unlike in basketball, where they just had a couple that were really strong and powerful, here they had quite a few, and they were kind of all over the place. Starting off with Masters, and in the case of Masters, this is a kind of a mess. This is where Fleer was clearly starting to get involved with the operations. It was kind of like they said to SkyBox, okay, you take care of the main card sets, we'll take care of the inserts. The Masters cards have a picture of the player and then a picture of the player, and they don't really, they kind of run together. The card back looks extremely like a Fleer card back. It's weird because it still looks good. Don't get me wrong, it looks good. It's just, it doesn't have the same spirit as the main cards in the set. Fortunately, Intense still does carry that SkyBox mystique. These cards are, they have a colorful swirl in the background. They have some etched metal, and so you may have some patterns with the swirl against the swirl. You know, some interesting things going on. These are cards that you want to kind of move around and see how the light plays off of them. And then they also have a holofoil N on it, which makes it really bold and bright. So these cards actually do look great. These cards really do fit with the rest of the set. Then they have their rookies, their emotion rookies, and these cards, unfortunately, it's difficult to be able to understand that these are actually emotion cards. They look like Flair, they look like Ultra, they don't look like SkyBox. And it's weird because, I mean, this really does look like it's a Fleer card in every way. So you got to look for the logo and see that, oh yeah, it is emotion. But fortunately, they're timeless Ripken cards at the end. This was back to very much a SkyBox approach. In this case, it's a whole series of cards that are focused on Cal Ripken Jr., looking at his career over time. And what's nice about these cards is they have a nice white border, image of Cal right there up on front, and then they have an image up at the top that's in a sepia or a gold tone that has kind of a chrome quality. So it has this really neat quality to it where it feels almost like it's alive, lightened up, almost like it's a TV screen that's glowing. It has an interactive quality to it that's really kind of cool. And so this is a card set that, while the white can kind of drag it down, those images are really neat. And the card backs, all right, the card backs are kind of tough because they're both good and they're bad. But you know, card backs often are pretty tough to really make work. So for 95-96, in basketball, SkyBox decided to go away from emotion and go into another area with what they called EXL. And this was basically the foreshadowing of the EX2000 cards that would come out the next year. And with basketball, they got away from the whole emotion aspect of it. They went with art cards. That was the whole focus of the cards. Well, in baseball, they also made the change, but instead of just saying EXL, these were known as Emotion XL. And that's a distinctive element because they kept that little emotion element onto it. And they didn't get to the same level of art that they did with basketball. I mean, basketball, really, they were trying to go with, these are all works of art. In baseball, they blended the two sets. They blended the emotion set that you'd known and what they were doing with the basketball set. So with these cards, first off, just like with basketball, they have a matte frame around the outside. But unlike basketball, where they dominated the card with the matte, here they used it as a treatment around the outside, and then on the inside they have a tight shot of the player, and then the whole background is a color. And that color is not related to the color of the matte. I'll get to that in a second. But you can see that they do still have the word that's associated with each player. But down at the bottom, they have two elements that are in silver foil. One is EXL, the EXL logo. The other is where they have the name and the team, which is kind of a seal with some leaves that come off, and then the matte goes around those, so they head out into the picture. So it's kind of a weird card, and they don't really change that stuff. That just is on every single card. But the matte itself comes in one of three different colors. So not three different colors. Each card comes in one of three. So every single team is laid out where the first couple of cards in the team have a green matte. and then the next group have a maroon mat, and then the last cards in each team have a blue mat. The background is not related to the mat, it's just kind of independent for each player, but that's the way they laid out all these cards. And the card backs are, they're there. It's a nice picture, otherwise it's a pretty lousy image. But they have the back of the card is glossy because the image is glossy, and then they have a matte card that they stick onto the front. And you'll see a little bit of how that plays in as we get into the inserts. They also did their checklists where all of the checklists have the blue mat. Again, the background behind the checklist text does vary, but all of the checklists come with the blue mat. And they had 4 inserts, and the first one is defense. In this case, they swapped the matte and the glossy so that the frame around the outside is glossy, and then the background is matte. But they have the player as kind of a cutout that is integrated into the glossy matte or the glossy border on the outside, and then they cut out around it so that the matte surface behind, which also has a shot of the player, kind of appears in the nooks and crannies. And when you flip the card over, the card back surface is all matte as well. So they have the glossy on the front and they have the matte on the back, and they just happen to cut through for this card. The intense cards, ironically, they do the same thing, except it's almost all glossy with a little bit of matte. However, on the back, it's all glossy, which is a strange thing that they did on this one card, because in every other case, they either have glossy on the front and matte on the back, both sides, or the reverse. And the intense cards, these are terrible looking cards anyway, so it's kind of a big mess regardless. And then the Legion of Boom are the most creative of all of these, where they again have the glossy border on the outside. They have the player integrated in that's also glossy, and then it's cut out, but instead of having a matte on the back, they have a translucent back, which means light passes through. And the player splits the colors on the back. So the back has a fade from the top to the bottom, but it also has 2 different colors that starts the fade off on the top. When you flip it around to the other side, you can see where they kind of transition, which is kind of interesting. But on the front, these are really impressive cards. They don't do anything, but they are extremely distinctive cards that stand out in a decade that was all about cards standing out. These are very unusual, and they're really neat in just how unique they are. And their last insert set is Rare Breeds, and this really shows that Fleer and SkyBox now are the same thing. Fleer had already started doing lenticular cards. Well, here in this SkyBox Emotion set, or Emotion XL, they put in a lenticular card for their Rare Breeds card, and it has a good amount of 3D in it. In this case, it has some balls and bats and a catcher's mask, stuff like that in the back, but the cards do read really well. And that was how they closed it out. Unfortunately, Emotion was great in the set, but Fleer couldn't help but kind of ruining some of the insert cards. But a few of the insert cards still did come out really well. But as far as the main set cards go, this is one of the really great fresh ideas that had been done. And personally, as a football fan, I really wish they'd done this for football. That would have been really great, would have been exquisite, but they didn't do that. But still, otherwise, setting that aside, these cards read magnificently. They are very special cards, and it was a great way to introduce SkyBox to the baseball card market. They worked well, and they did a great job of transitioning into EX2000. Now, that's a whole nother story. But you can definitely see with the Legion of Boom cards just how they were leading up to EX2000. That's all there is to say about it, though. So I'm going to go ahead and leave off here. Definitely subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out my other videos, and thank you very much for watching.